Live, all the way live. Week 5. Live with Week 5 here with Gene Bramwell and Matt Walden. This is Sigmund Bloom, footballguys.com. And here we go. And as always, I'm not gonna ramp up. And just so everyone knows, none of us really got to see much of the college football yesterday. I just caught a little bit on the tail end, but I hope Katy Perry can cast some of her magic over this NFL week. And if you don't know what I'm talking about, look it up, check it out. And I know we will get magic this morning from Dr. Gene. And Dr. Gene, we're going to jump right in with injury situations because this is what's most affecting our lineup choices this morning. And, of course, the first and foremost is Calvin Johnson. And you're going strong to the hole, man. You got some strong clarity on this one. And, Ian Rappaport, when Ian Rappaport tweets out, Calvin Johnson's going to play, but how will he look? I mean, it's almost like he's trying to tell us something that he can't tell us, Gene?
Yeah, I think that's the case, and I don't know that I have clarity on this situation. I think the clarity comes from an understanding that Calvin Johnson may not get his usual number of touches today. We saw him be a decoy last week. I don't know that he's going to be a decoy today, but there's also no guarantee that you're going to see 8 to 12 to 15 targets and touches for Johnson today, even though they'll be in high leverage situations. But I agree. Ian Rappaport saying, how what we know he's not going to be fully healthy today. Tim Twentyman yesterday or Friday after practice thought that Calvin Johnson's body language is a little bit better this week than at the same time last week. But we heard that Johnson looked pretty good in warm-ups last week, too, that he was moving well, that he was cutting okay, and then he wasn't on the field for consecutive plays. He really wasn't running routes at all, much less just rounding them off. So with another week, I think, somebody just tweeted at me that he thinks that if Johnson is active, he's less likely to be a decoy. I agree with that. I think that's the case. However, I don't think you can be guaranteed any more than 3 to 5 targets today in this situation. If that's the case, then the clarity comes from knowing what Calvin Johnson's floor is. Yes, you could get Jimmy Graham returning from his plantar fasciitis in the middle of the year last year and getting 4 catches and 2 touchdowns. You could get Brandon Marshall playing through a very painful ankle injury and get 3 targets and 2 touchdowns. You could also get what you got from Calvin Johnson last week, or you could get what you got from Brandon Marshall in week 3, which was nothing. So if you're willing to fade the risk that Calvin Johnson only gets a couple of targets and very few yards for you today against the upside that he may only get a couple of targets but score, then go ahead and put Calvin Johnson in your lineup. But I got questions. Do you play Kelvin Benjamin or Calvin Johnson? I'm playing Benjamin. Do you play Keenan Allen or Calvin Johnson? I'm playing Allen. You asked me about Julian Edelman. That's a little bit closer, but I think if you've got a guy that's going to get you 6 to 8 targets and has a legitimate chance of scoring, I think that's pretty close to what Calvin Johnson's ceiling would be today. Now we got to watch and see what's said about him in pregame warmups, and if they're a little bit more optimistic about him, then maybe you bump up Calvin Johnson into that 5 to 8 range, just outside the elite tier wide receivers, rather than down to the 10 to 15 to 18 to 20 range. But I think that's where the clarity comes in. I don't really have any sense of exactly how healthy Johnson is and how many targets he's going to get. But I think given what we saw last week, you have to entertain the strong possibility that he's only going to get a couple of targets. And if you put him in your lineup, be mindful that that could be the case. The test I put out there was, if you're going to throw something at your TV, if Calvin Johnson has 3 targets and 2 touchdowns, then start Calvin. If you see him have that kind of production and it just makes you happy because you know then sit him for one of your other options. I think that's the way to approach this, and hopefully it works out for the best, whatever you guys decide.
And the clarity in the situation is we had a lot of the same incoming data last week, with the exception of he felt better. He says he felt better, and you saw what you got. So you've been warned that that's what you might get this week, because nothing has changed dramatically enough to make us think that the numbers and outcome will change dramatically. Intertwined with this situation, Gene, is Golden Tate, who had a hamstring flare-up. And, Golden Tate with a decoy-ish Calvin Johnson could be massive, but we have a little hesitation. How much hesitation should we have?
Not too much. I think him getting back to practice on Friday, and he's listed probable, is he not?
I think that's
so
right.
I think that's a good indication that they're expecting him to be able to get through this game without too much trouble. Any hamstring injury, especially one that happens midweek, is at risk of aggravation, so you could see Tate go out there and not be able to get through more than a quarter of an action, or to have an aggravation early on and limp through the rest of the game. But I think he's I'd be willing to put him in my lineup today. And with Calvin Johnson maybe not being himself, I think that's even more reason to do so given what we saw last week. I think he's okay.
Matt, do you have any Calvin Johnson decisions today? And what's your general philosophy approaching situations like this?
Yeah, I have him right now as in a league where I can start 4 wide receivers or 3 and a flex tight end in a PPR league. So he's at a point that if Cecil Shorts were healthy, I might be looking at Cecil Shorts and Calvin Johnson as the either or pick. Right now it's Devin Hester, Calvin Johnson, and then either a tight end like Luke Wilson or Jacob Tamme as a second tight end. So at this point, to me, Johnson just has the upside. It's a definite upside pick, and I'll keep Hester in the lineup right now, and that's pretty much where I'll go. So I don't have a great deal of choices when it comes to looking at Johnson, but when it comes to philosophy with it, if it's a situation the way Gene described where it could be a Brandon Marshall like high leverage target deal, then you go ahead and play him. Last week what I saw was someone who shouldn't have been out on the field. At least that's what I saw when he was playing. I wasn't privy to warm-ups or seeing anything there. I didn't see anything in terms of any type of televised bits of what he was doing. So this week, I look at it and think that if he's a little bit better or the same as last week, maybe they'll be a little smarter about how they can use him. And if that's the case, then that little bit of knowledge might be some power for that team. Because again, last week I think they were just trying to figure out what he could do and couldn't do. This week they'll have a little bit of a higher bar in terms of understanding what's going to happen and what they can and can't do with him. So in that sense, it may not be. I'm not expecting anything like 80 to 100 yards from him. I'm expecting again 40 to 60 yards, maybe a touchdown.
Again, what everyone should be hearing out there is that the rational expectation is for Calvin Johnson to be well below his normal level of playing numbers. That doesn't mean that's exactly what's going to happen. But unlike the Jimmy Graham situation last year when we were guessing and he did have a low participation, he still turned that into 2 touchdowns. We've seen a sample of a game with Calvin Johnson with this injury. Gene, it's time for our weekly Arian Foster segment. Take it away.
I don't know what to say about Foster this week. He practiced less. I didn't think he looked that good in the second half of the Week 4 game, but he's listed probable. So I'm not sure what to make of that. I think earlier in the week, it was clear that Foster said he wasn't healthy. Bill O'Brien said that they were going to use Alfred Blue a little bit more. What we saw in the second half after that first series coming out of halftime was an Arian Foster that looked like he was a little bit tight, a little bit tentative, who was no longer used in the based offense. Alfred Blue was running the ball in the base offense, and they bring Arian Foster back in passing situations, and sometimes they split him away from the formation. Maybe he felt well enough after Friday's practice to say, I'm better this Friday than I was last Friday, and they know that he was able to make it through last week's game and not have trouble in practice by the end of the week this week. That's probably why they listed him as probable, because they fully expect him to play. That does not mean that he's going to get as many touches as he's got in the past. I think I'd work from a baseline of about 12 to 15 touches, put him in our running back 2 range, and hope that he does a little bit better than that. But if there's any aggravation, and those are always an issue with Foster, or the game script goes in another direction where they can put Alfred Blue in there and let him run, then Foster could do a little bit less. So call him a risk-reward running back 2 and hope that he gets through this game healthy.
And again, I want to just give you a quick opportunity. You don't have to break it down in depth, but just as our season outlook for this, because what we want is for this to be something that, by week 7 or 8, 6 maybe even, we're not talking about it, but based on what we've seen for the first 5 weeks, what do you forecast for Foster's season? Will it remain this cloudy?
I'm going to continue to say that he's week to week until we see him get through a game fully healthy, taking 20 plus touches and not looking like he's limited at all. And I'll feel even better if he's not on the practice report at all. But as long as he says he's not 100% and we're not seeing him being used as he was in week 1 and week 2, I think he's week to week. And at any point, we could be looking at another week's absence or an extended absence based on an aggravation.
Matt, have you gotten much of a chance to watch Alfred Blue this year?
I have, and he looks like the Alfred Blue at Louisiana State, which is a good thing and a not so good thing. I mean, the good thing is that you give him decent creases, and he's going to be able to get downhill and carry people for yards and break arm tackles, and he's doing that. He's running with confidence, so he looks like the guy that you saw in college right now. So that's a function of both the scheme and a function of his transition right now. It's been fairly quick. I don't see him as a special back. I think that I don't think he's someone that you're going to look at and say he has a long-term future as a starter. Maybe he's more of a plug-in starter for a team that's running back deficient, but that doesn't matter for you as a fantasy owner right now. If he's in the game and gets the starts, he's going to be worthwhile as a running back two who's capable of low-end running back one totals depending on how the game script flows.
Yeah, well, and I think the other thing is, and like you said, Matt, he's been adequate, or at the very least what he has to offer to the running game, he's been summoning up and contributing it. But it's the fact that this is a defense and running game heavy team, and if Alfred Blue is the key of that attack, if Foster's out, I mean, I think he will have running back two value. So we'll continue to watch this. Briefly, Gene, Andre Johnson, the other Houston Texan that seems like, going back to the preseason, is going to have trouble getting off of the injury report. As it is, you're already a little underwhelmed at what you've gotten from him. It is Dallas, and this was a matchup that a month ago we would have been absolutely salivating over, not as much now. What does the injury picture for Andre Johnson add to your decision of whether to start him today?
I don't think the injury picture is as cloudy as the questionable tag makes it appear. I think they marked him questionable mostly because he didn't practice much this week and the ankle is bothering him. But I think everything from John McClain and the local media and national media guys from Ed Werder this morning fully suggests that Johnson's going to play and that he's not going to be all that limited. But we've seen this time and again with wide receivers. Something happens during the game where they just don't feel like they can cut well enough to run their routes well, then their targets are not going to follow. And Ryan Fitzpatrick has shown that he's not afraid to look to DeAndre Hopkins or another outlet if Johnson isn't getting separation. Now, you're right, it's the Dallas secondary, and there's been issues, and we're talking about Orlando Scandrick and a few other guys there, and some safeties that aren't necessarily the most consistent in coverage. So the matchup is good, but I'd be a little bit leery about calling Johnson much more than a wide receiver 3 play today.
Which he might be that for the rest of the year, honestly, just because DeAndre Hopkins is still going to get the red zone targets and probably the deep targets, and Ryan Fitzpatrick. I mean, what we need is for the Texans to fall behind in some games. Honestly, if you want Andre Johnson to start putting up the PPR numbers, which again, because of the way the team is structured and their schedule, might not happen that much. Matt, I just want to toss it to you and ask you, as I was alluding to, that we would have targeted this matchup based on the preseason and based on paper, on the Cowboys defense on paper, and say, even though they're shaky, Foster and Johnson not as shaky, but still, injury issues, and DeAndre Hopkins, even Ryan Fitzpatrick, how much have you revised your view of the Cowboys defense? Are you willing to say they're mediocre, or are we still waiting? And in general, I just want your thoughts on this surprise showdown between Dallas and Houston at 3-1 and leading their division.
Yeah, Dallas, to me, I think it's just kind of a continuation of what we talked about on Thursday night, which is I think Dallas's defense has definitely looked better. I mean, you couldn't dispute that at all. And it comes down to, I think, the linebacker play and the defensive line playing better than maybe some people expected, especially when it comes to the linebackers with McClain, Durant, and Bruce Carter. It seems like they kind of had to do a little jigsaw puzzle maneuvering to figure out where all those puzzle pieces fit, and it all kind of clicked last week against New Orleans, although New Orleans offense has struggled a little bit at times. Really, the defense has more than anything, but it's been a kind of a combination of issues for that team, and Dallas able to exploit that. With Carter out again, and Carter was starting to play well, then you're going to have a little bit of concern there. But I think that the secondary is still weak with this team. Kean Fay did a good job of talking about that on Thursday night as well. and this team has had a history of looking great and terrible in alternate weeks or alternate points of the season. The difference, I think, I have a little more optimism this year, and the difference is the offensive line. And I think that's something that always is. Always turns out to be kind of that baseline, thing for any team. If your offensive line is playing well, it's playing consistent, it's dominating off the ball, it just affords a whole host of opportunities for your defense to be a little bit more rested, your team to be able to be more flexible on offense with its play calling, and you're probably more likely to be in games, and you're not going to have as many mental letdowns, I think, because of the dealings with momentum and dealings with will being broken and players getting down early. It's been something I've been kind of writing about yesterday, and a little bit I'm going to be writing more about today, which is the emotional factor of football that I think is getting inadvertently pushed to the side with our analysis these days. But when you have an offensive line that can dominate and break the will of a defense, that's a big deal, and that's going to keep you in games week in and week out. And I think Dallas, there's a lot of hope, and rightfully so in Dallas. So I look at this matchup, and I think that Dallas's offensive line is going to actually help that defense. And because of the fact that Ryan Fitzpatrick is an inconsistent player, this should be a game that Dallas wins.
Well, yeah, again, it's accepting that maybe Dallas is a decent team, and Tennessee saying, "Well, we're trying it. We're trying to put the line together. Why isn't it clicking for us?" But you bring up a really good point. And by the way, why we don't talk about the emotional side of football that much in our analysis, Matt, is because we can't predict it. We can't predict it with any reliability. Try to predict. I know this because I'm a bar certified attorney. My wife's a trial attorney, a prosecutor, a felony prosecutor. Try to predict what 12 people are going to do in a jury.
Let's just put it this way in terms for the stat heads out there. Okay, the only way they would be able to do it is, I was reading excerpts again from Jim Brown's biography, Out of Bounds, and he was talking about fear in football and how if it basically saying if you don't think football players are afraid, then you're lying to yourself. And if Jim Brown says that he was afraid in the toughest era of football as the guy who never missed a football game and was the target of all the types of things that Roger Goodell would probably need a whole 12-pack of Depends every time he watched a game, you would understand that if Jim Brown says he's afraid, any football player is. And when Ryan Riddle was on my show a couple weeks ago in the RSP film room, he talked about a hit that Washington linebacker Shaq Thompson put in early in the game, and he described it as this was like the feeling out process, where when you lay that type of hit, it's your way of saying, are you sure you really want to come over in my space, because this is what I'm going to do to you all day. That's a will-breaking fear factor type of attitude, and if that still exists as described by a former NFL player from the past 10 years and a current player in college football, fear is an issue. The problem is how do you measure when will is broken, when that fear takes place? Because it's all anecdotal right now, unless you had a team of interdisciplinary researchers in sports psychology and kinesiology who are like surveying these players after a certain point during the game, which would never happen, and the players would never go for it, because the last thing they'd want is the NFL or some organization having data or information that says this guy basically got scared or lost his composure at certain points in the game. They would never let that happen. They don't want to be psychoanalyzed like that and have teams have that info. But that kind of stuff does happen. And it's either a mental dominance or physical dominance, where you start to, the team gets in your head and you lose your will. And it's real. Momentum is real. If someone tells you momentum isn't real, they've probably never played football. And if they talk about fear, they never played sports. And if they did, they probably are intellectually rationalizing that they've gotten when they've gotten knocked in the mouth and hit really hard and they were afraid to continue, and they probably rationalized as saying, well, those guys were cheating. They weren't really playing within the bounds of the rules, so I just kind of quit and gave up in that situation. When the reality is, you just didn't have the mental toughness, you didn't have the emotional toughness to handle that in that day. And football players, even at this level, that happens to them. And I think that, it's easy sometimes that with all these great analytics and stats that we do have in the game, we've intellectualized the game as the game has gotten more intellectualized, going from run dominance to pass dominance. And as a result of that, the emotional element sometimes gets pushed out of the table.
Well, and the Super Bowl. I mean, the Super Bowl is a terrific example of this, where you have this outcome that seems way out on the edge of possibilities, but the emotional edge drives that. And Gene, I'm gonna wake you back up. Come back to us, because I want you to tell me whether this sounds really stupid, based on what Matt was saying, or something that's actually feasible down the line. Is I could picture watching a football game where you see above each of the 11 players on each side like an active brain scan of where brain activity is going on, and we actually will by that time have pattern matching where we'll say, oh, the will of that defense, they all look like they're about to give up. And we see this stuff with body language and things like that.
No boxing matches with the little energy bar, but
sure, totally. But I mean, you will be able to start to see the scientific side of breaking your opponent's will and things like that. But to wrap it all back up, and then I want you to talk about this a little bit, Gene, and try to make it sound pseudo-medical or something, or scientific. But and I'll even bring baseball in to try to perk your ears up, and then we'll go on to actual. We'll go back on to topics of time. But this is a good overarching topic, because the context you brought it up in, Matt, was this idea of the offensive line sort of normalizing or equalizing a team and having effects on both sides of the ball. And I think of baseball, and I think of the way that if you have a good starting pitcher, the defense relaxes, the hitters relax, because you don't need to, hey, get one run, and this guy's going to make it hold up. And also with respect to the defense, pitchers that work with a good pace, pitchers that work in a way that keeps them on their toes, it keeps everybody engaged and involved. And likewise, I would think that a good offensive line allows running backs and quarterbacks and wide receivers running the routes to execute with just more calm and patience, because they feel like the play is going to have a decent chance of working, where if you had either a bad quarterback, and this is the thing, it's I think teams, speaking of this picture where you can see their brain graph and see whether they're confident or starting to lose their confidence, quarterbacks are the same way for a football team. We were reminiscing, Matt, about the Greg Lewis Hail Mary from Brett Favre, but Brett Favre has that effect on a team, had that effect where guys could relax and feel like, let's just keep it close, let's do our jobs.
And a defense, when Warren Sapp or another defensive tackle or end is hitting him and popping him hard, and he's hurt in that game, it comes into the game, and I mean, he enters that game hurt, and he's popped hard play after play, and he's popping up John back with them. You don't think that gets into their mind a little bit, like, I'm giving this guy the best I've got, and he's just laughing at me and still throwing the ball like he does.
So, Gene, I guess I'm going to give you the floor and just talk about mind-body synergy, in whatever fashion you want, or just say, I don't want to. Let's talk about Ben Tate.
You don't want to.
Let's leave it at this. I'm not sure how much to buy into momentum. I'm not sure how much to buy into clutch. But I definitely buy into collective confidence, and I think that's kind of what you're saying there.
Yeah.
So, call it adrenaline, call it, whatever confidence is, those sorts of things. But I think collective confidence is real, and when you look into your teammates' eyes, whether they're actually confident or not, and you see that you feel like they have things under control, those things help. Now, can one player transcend all of that and overcome everybody's energy bars being crappy over their heads on his team and pull them out of that? That's possible. But I think there's something to collective confidence. The rest of that, again, unpredictable.
Yeah, well, brain chemistry, brain science, like the zone, right? I mean, they've proven that the zone is a real thing, right, Gene? That you can get into sort of a level of consciousness where things become more automatic.
I don't know what sort of proof there is, but I think anybody who's ever been in that situation, recognizing that, that you don't hear things, You see things differently. The sense of tunnel vision, the sense of just not being able to hear everything goes quiet and dark. I haven't read enough to know whether it's been proven from a physiologic standpoint or a brain chemistry standpoint, but I think those things are real. Again, is it adrenaline related? Is it endorphin related? Is it just plain mind over matter related? I don't know that I could put a nice little scientific physiologic bow on it, but yeah, I think some of those things are definitely real.
Yeah,
Bloom,
yeah, go ahead.
gene.
Yeah.
Bloom, gene.
Yeah. Well, I just think I do think the science is going to start catching up to these things. And
the problem with the science is that you have to know what to study.
Well, sure.
And I think, when are we going to get to that point? Yes, maybe. I mean, at some point, we would hope, think about what we know now that we didn't know 20 years ago, 40 years ago, 100 years ago. Hopefully, yes, but the brain is a funny place.
Well, but we do kind of know these things. We're really getting off on a tangent, but this is fun because this is the first time we've done this. We do kind of know these things in the sense that we've always practiced things like meditation and yoga and so on to try to create these brain states. Or visualizing, like sitting in the locker room and visualizing how you're going to play. Like we know on an intuitive level that we can affect we can kind of use our will to affect our brain chemistry, which then in turn affects, and it creates that feedback loop. But I'm getting way. Can you guys tell that I was out at a show until 2 a.m. last night?
Next thing Bloom's going to do is ask Gene to get his fingers like this. That's
the crazy
thing about connect to his higher power of.
Yeah. Just as you started this conversation, all of my Google Chrome tabs went completely white. I can't see you guys. I can't. So I'm doing all this blind. I'm reading your facial expressions.
This is
blind. I'm just talking into a camera. I can't see anything.
That's great. That's fantastic.
But when I drop off here in a second and hope it comes back, I hope I come back too.
Okay.
Not because I'm going away, because I don't understand what's going on right now.
It can't be explained.
Yeah, no. The computers they're responding to us. Okay, so. Gene, before you drop off then, let's Ben Tate real quick. I know he's listed as probable, but we've gotten some good stuff from the team to peripherally give us some sense of what he could or could not do. Tennessee's a good matchup this week. How willing should people be to stick their neck out for Tate?
Yeah, so speaking of mind over matter, this one is goofy this week because you've got the team saying Ben Tate is going to start for us. Ben Tate is ready to come back. We're allowing him to practice. And then Tate says on Friday, basically, that was a pretty tough practice. I might swell up tomorrow. I'm not so sure. Today on Instagram and his Facebook and his Twitter account, he seems like he's ready to go. But there was definite hesitance in his comments to the media on Friday. And maybe all that's been resolved. He woke up on Saturday feeling great and he's ready to go. But Terrence West has been there. Isaiah Crowell has looked a lot better over the last couple of weeks. Coming out of the bye week, we're not exactly sure what Cleveland's going to be up to. I would have a hard time thinking we're going to see Ben Tate's usage being the same as it was in week 1, where we didn't see Crowell at all, where we saw Terrence West as a change of pace option, and to where Tate is going to be getting 80 to 90% of the carries. I think we're going to see a much heavier rotation, whether it's Crowell or West or it's a three-headed situation, I'm not sure. But even though Tate is probable, and all the signs from running back coach Wilbur Montgomery and everybody else was that he was going to start, I think that's going to happen. But instead of it being even a 2-to-1 series rotation with Tate and then somebody else, I think we could see a lot more carries for those other guys today than Tate, unless he really looks good in those first couple of series, feels great, running good behind that line, the offense is clicking. If that happens, then Tate's probably going to get the bulk of the carries. But I think that's what it's going to take to keep the Browns from going to a game plan by which we find a running back by committee today.
So, Matt, I'm slow on the take, as always. But I just realized, and this has been going on how many years, that you've had as your avatar the Crow.
Yes.
So talk about the Crow, man, because here I am continuing to stump that if there is a running back out there that you might see on waivers or can get cheap in a trade that could change your season, it is Isaiah Crowell. But you're going to talk about it in a much more defined way than I can about what we've seen from Crowell in comparison to what we saw from him in his incarnations in college. And particularly, and this is and maybe this is me getting overexcited, but I just see his fit in this running game as divine, like chosen. I mean, this feels like the situation where he can be the best running back he can be in the NFL.
It's a crazy situation. I mean, and I will just note that you need to spend more time with, I think, Ryan Riddle, because like the first time within the 2 weeks, Ryan's like, "What's the deal with crows? Like, why do you have But anyway, the Isaiah Crowell. I mean, it's one of those situations that I look at Ben Tate and his propensity for injuries that he's had in the past. Can't predict the future, except for the fact that he might slip on one of those plastic or rubber beer bottles that they have in Cleveland, otherwise known as the American football hooligan fan base of the NFL. And he might slip on one of those broken bottles on the field, like back in the days when I was there, and do something to his ankle, and then we'll have Crowell in the regular basis. But seriously, Crowell is probably the best running back on that team. I think he's long been the best running back on that team. It's just that this team has had to be reasonably cautious about how they use him. For starters, everyone and their mama has basically said, don't draft this guy. He's an issue. He got kicked out of Georgia. His effort comes into question at Alabama State. And honestly, any team that picked him was going to be reasonably cautious about how he was going to be. There, when you have well-known analysts who used to play with this team say, basically tell folks that he was as dumb as could be, with the dumbest player that they've ever met, that raises a lot of red flags too. So, Cleveland, understandably, they drafted a guy ahead of them. They got a big-time free agent. Those guys are going to get reps. That's how the order goes. That's kind of the hierarchy in a preseason setup. So the fact that he didn't get a lot of carries had nothing to do with his talent, had nothing with what he was doing on the field. It just had to do with the fact that they already knew who they wanted to give a shot to first. And so then towards the end of the season, end of the preseason, when they do give him a few more carries, and he looks like Isaiah Crowell, a very dynamic one-cut runner who is capable of making defenders miss in the backfield and layering moves in a way that one-cut runners often aren't able to do, but he does it with such great decisiveness and understanding of how to read blocks at the first and second level, and then display the balance and power to be able to break tackles that normally would take down a good running back, and then have the versatility to catch the ball and block as a pass blocker. He may not be the smartest guy for whatever the intelligence rating was from this intelligent analyst from who used to be at Georgia, who knows how intelligent that guy was, or is. He's definitely smart on the football field. And I would say, watching him at Alabama State, I thought he was smart at Alabama State to run out of bounds, to not engage in all these plays. Because honestly, folks, and this is something I wrote about back in December when I said he was the most talented back in his draft class, though talent may not mean everything. When you get kicked out of a major college program after being SEC Freshman of the Year, and you get kicked out like after that season, and no one wants to touch you, excuse me, you end up at Alabama State. If you're going to be an NFL prospect, that first you have to either stay healthy and you have to ball out and be good, and be good off the field. He was good off the field, and the choice he had to make was, do I stay healthy, or do I ball out in situations where I might not be healthy for the combine? And the combine is what's going to make a difference for me. Somebody gave him good advice, even though everyone in the media was saying, you got to try harder. The coaches are saying, you've got to try harder. Well, he knew that he needs to be able to come into an NFL camp healthy and ball out then. And that's what he did. But he took a lot of criticism for it, just kind of like Jadeveon Clowney and his effort. But they saw what happened to Marcus Lattimore, and you saw what's gone on with Clowney not being completely healthy, and then also having some nagging injuries, and now ended up having to get a second surgery, or did he have to? I don't know if he had to get a second surgery, but he hasn't played for a little bit of time. So you look at all that, and basically what I'm saying is that Crowell didn't get the opportunities till late because that's the order of things in the NFL when you are an undrafted free agent. But once they saw what they had, and the coaches really saw what they had, because the coaches didn't pick him, the front office decided to pick him. Once they decided that, you should notice on the field that on third downs or passing situations, he's the one in to block. In the fourth quarter, in the second half of games, he's the one that's often in the game getting the ball. In goal line situations, he's the one at the goal line. He may not get as many carries as Terrence West. He may not get all the goal line carries, but he's seen all of those things as a third string back or a second string back. Those are telling moments, and the coaches trust him. They trust him in high leverage situations that have to make a difference, and high risk situations they trust him. For an undrafted rookie, that states a lot. And Browns fans aren't stupid. They are certainly they are certainly emotional. They certainly get angry, and they are certainly frustrated over what has gone on for years. But to a man, I think I've seen videos of Browns fans and tweets from Browns fans. They all see it. They know that Crowell is the best guy, and this is and I think the Browns team knows this too.
Feed the crow. No, and I gave you the chance to do that extended. And look, we're not always going to be right, and it's scary, Matt, when we agree. But there's been some players where we've lined up on this year, and Travis Kelce, of course, being the standard bearer, and the idea being that, look, we know the talent's there, and we know that if they're used, the talent's going to come to the surface. It's starting to happen for Crowell. It hasn't happened yet for Cody Latimer, and it may not happen until 2015. It has happened for Travis Kelce. So we just, all we can do is identify this stuff when we see it, and then hope that it gets the opportunity to flourish. And you can see with just half opportunity what Kelce's done with that. If Crowell can get that opportunity, woo! All right, let's get back to any reason at all to wait around for Eric Decker. I mean, are you basically saying if you play Eric Decker, if you have no other alternative, I mean, go get A.J. Jenkins from the waiver wire, or how bad is it?
I wouldn't wait around for Decker. What time does he play today? Is he a later game?
He's in the afternoon game. You could play
Correct. The Giants are playing early, so the Jets have the 4 o'clock. You have to have a top 30 hedge.
So, like,
Decker. I mean,
is John Brown enough, or would you say, hey, just play John Brown against Denver over him?
I think I would probably play John Brown. I don't expect Decker to play today, but I admit I was surprised that he was on the field and as productive as he was last week. But the fact that you've got a midweek downgrade in practice for 2 consecutive days, that he's questionable, that he's said he's not right, that he's had multiple aggravations of this injury over the past 2 to 3 weeks, I think this really sets up as the week for the Jets to sit him and let him rest. I think that's what's likely to happen.
Bloom, I want to ask you an analysis question since and on this point. With Decker out, or likely out, or maybe ineffective, I've seen you picking this guy up. Yeah. Tell us a little bit about why you're picking up Greg Salas.
Yeah, well, first of all, part of it is this. Okay, when I review tape in the spring, there are just certain guys, and Matt, we talk about this a lot on and off the air, guys who just do what they do without thinking about it. And I always kind of make a mental note, and it's so hard for me, and I know that you're going to go through a similar thing with Kenbrell Tompkins now that he's been released. But it's so hard to let go of that. And even if their career goes through hell and high water, in the back of your mind you still feel like, I've seen this guy be in tune with the game of football. And back in Hawaii, even though it was a gimmicky offense and everything, Greg Salas was that big slot receiver who was very fluid and smooth out of the slot to create separation, but he's bigger and he's a good run after catch threat. And otherwise, he just seemed like the kind of player, like I wanted him to be in a New Orleans, New England, Indy, give him a quarterback and let him be this piece that can get open in those short and intermediate zones. And he bounced around and didn't do much. I think he started out with the Rams.
He started off with the Rams, and he dropped the ball a couple of times as a
early opportunity. Yeah, as a rookie, got early opportunity and flamed out. But here's what I'm seeing from him: he's getting open downfield. I mean, he's getting very open downfield. And this and another thing, if I can step back and talk deep dynasty, and this is a deeper cuts version of our Sunday morning update. But in deep dynasty, what I'm looking for when I'm cycling through my roster spots, and that's what's fun about having, like Matt said, the email updates whenever you get an email notification when someone makes a waiver wire move, because I will tell you, both of these guys, I'm pointing at my screen, I'm pointing at the little squares with them. Both of these dudes, if I see it come across my email box that Gene or Matt picked someone up, who did they pick up? And what you want to be looking for are players that are, on that upslope side of their career, probably 27 or younger, that we haven't gotten a chance to see, at least recently, that they would, given an opportunity, to flame out. So, and Matt, you brought up some good ones of these earlier, like this week. Fozzie Whitaker, another good one. Who's the other guy that you were bringing up when you were talking about these preemptive pickups?
Fozzie Whitaker, Marion Grice.
Marion Grice.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we don't know yet, and the opportunity is going to be there. I mean, Garrett Crisales either way is going to get on the field this week. George Wynn in Detroit is going to get on the field this week. Fozzie Whitaker for Carolina is going to get on the field this week. Marion Grice for Arizona, going to get on the field this week. And the thing about dynasty stock is, or otherwise your waiver wire speed dial list and your prioritization is, it only takes a couple of, even if Marion Grice only gets 3 or 4 or 5 touches, we're going to get to see him. And we're going to get a good idea of where he is. And this is the Crowell thing. I mean, we've seen enough to know that all we need is the opportunity to increase, and the numbers will definitely come.
And
go ahead.
Let me go back and look. Let's use Greg Salas as an example in St. Louis. Okay, what we saw from Greg Salas, the reason he got benched was that he dropped the ball. He got open. He just dropped the football, and he dropped the ball a couple of times on some Monday Night Football situations where he started as a rookie. The team lost confidence in him, and they benched him, and he eventually got cut. And then once you get cut that early as a player, usually that's a mark against you. Scouts note that. They pick a guy up. The coaches are like, well, he's just some guy off the free agent waiver wire at this point who flamed out. And even if he was good, they might give you the good PR and say, well, we really liked him and we picked him up. But he's at the end of the roster, and it's Isaiah Crowell time, just as I described earlier in this segment, where it's like you kind of have to prove yourself with very limited looks. And when he got those limited looks, he's had to rebuild and reclimb that ladder. And so that's what he's done with the Jets right now. But when he got cut, it wasn't because he wasn't getting open. It wasn't because he didn't have athleticism. It was because he dropped a couple of footballs, and they had a crowded wide receiver situation and a lot of and this team was kind of in flux because it was one regime with Josh McDaniel changing over to the Jeff Fisher regime, and they picked their own set of wide receivers. And trust me, Josh McDaniel's mediocre set of receivers versus Jeff Fisher's mediocre set of receivers, they're just a different type of physical specimen. And Salas probably was a little better. I think could be a little better than mediocre. He just got caught into the wash of two teams. Coaches who have general manager influences who don't do a very good job picking receivers.
And again, just to break this down to the simplest possible form of analysis, if you've been watching the Jets this year, he's getting open. I mean, very open downfield, and he's making plays. So that's what the essence of this whole thing is, right? Who can do it? Who can make plays? Greg Salas is doing it right now, and he's about to get an increased opportunity. Gene, really quickly, and this is a chance for you to review larger issues with this, because F Cashflow brought up Ahmad Bradshaw, and I didn't make that much note of it, and I don't want to catch you too unawares on this. He was in a walking boot earlier this week, but we know from Ahmad Bradshaw's history of foot and ankle injuries that a walking boot during the week for him might mean something different than it would for a player who, say, suffered an ankle injury in last week's game. So I want you to talk about Bradshaw specifically, but also the walking boot, because the walking boot comes up a lot, and sometimes, ooh, he was in a boot after the game, uh-oh, and sometimes just, he was in a boot, they're just resting it, it's fine.
Yeah, the boot doesn't generally concern me unless we've seen an injury mechanism that's really concerning, or unless we've been told that a player is going to get some imaging studies or something along those lines. And I'm just quickly reviewing Bradshaw's practice participation here. Even on Wednesday, they were calling him not injury related, and he fully practiced Thursday and Friday. So what sometimes happens with a boot is there's a little bit of pain, there's a little bit of swelling. The easiest way to immobilize that joint is to immobilize it, put it in a boot, and he comes back in for treatment on Monday and Tuesday morning, depending on how long the boot lasts. And then they don't want it on there long enough to cause any stiffness, but it's a good way to compress the swelling out of there. It's a good way to give the joint time to heal without any little movements or even micro movements that might be made in some sort of different, with an ace wrap or something like that. So if the boot comes off quickly, if there's no concerning injury mechanism, if he's back to practice by the end of the week, I don't think it's a concern. And I think that's the case with Bradshaw today. 2 consecutive full practices on Thursday, Friday. They're not even listing him as having an issue with the foot or an ankle there. I think he's good to go.
Okay, and otherwise, Gene, of course, we have Vernon Davis, by the way. Don't play Vernon Davis today. And the other situation, I'll toss this one to you really quickly, Gene, for Monday night's game, the tight end situation for Washington. If you are carrying both or you have one of the Washington tight ends that you're weighing in your tight end choice today, what do we know going into Sunday, keeping in mind that they don't play until Monday night?
I think Paul's practice participation through Friday and Saturday suggests that he's going to be sent to the independent neurologist and cleared. I think he's going to play Monday night. I'll be surprised if he's inactive. Conversely, I'll be surprised if Jordan Reed is active. His practice participation hasn't been great, and we've talked about this quite a bit over the past 3 or 4 weeks, not just with Jordan Reed, but with some other guys that have had some longer-term muscle strains, is that for the most part, players who have missed multiple weeks of practice need a week to get back up to speed conditionally before they get back to practice full-time in preparation to play. So I think Jordan Reed's downgrade in practice participation on Friday isn't necessarily meaningful from a aggravation standpoint, but I think it tells you that the plan all along was for him to kind of practice a little bit, see how he felt on back-to-back days. If he did good through these 3 to 5 days of practice from Wednesday through Saturday and Sunday, depending on how he feels on Monday, they'll probably ramp his practice participation up and get him prepared to play next week in week 6. The only way I think Jordan Reed has value this weekend would be if he's active and Niles Paul is not, and I just don't see that happening. Everything we've seen this week suggests that it's going to be the exact opposite.
By the way, getting from Dave Burkett right now that Calvin Johnson is doing ladder drills, testing out his ankle. So
which he was doing this time last week, by the way, and we were told that he looked like he was moving okay.
Yeah, man, you're on it, man. You're like a steel trap. But no, and again, no. What I like about that, Gene, is you hit the same note that I was hitting, which is, look, we have a week with basically 90 or 95% similar information leading up to the week as what we've had this week. So
yeah, and the next tweet from Burkett here is the key part, and he's saying the same thing we are, which is if we went through ladder drills, he looked okay, but he didn't run many routes with the wide receivers and Matt Stafford, and that's what they're going to go through in pregame warm-ups next. Now, if he looks like he can stop and start, if he can drive off that foot, stop without taking any extra steps, and come back to passes, or if he can crisply drop his hips and get in and out of routes. And if we're hearing Dave Burkett and Tim Twentyman and anybody else that's watching the Lions warm-up say that about Johnson, then I would feel a whole lot better about putting him in my lineup today, knowing that there's still the same risk there, but that he's showing us on the field this morning that he's more able to do things than he was at this time last week. So, we're in 140 characters. We're really not going to get a sense of. And these guys up in the press box are watching from yards and yards and yards away. They know the team well enough. They know what Johnson has done in practice over the last 3 or 4 days. So if we're seeing positive things from the press box, it's more reassuring than it was an hour ago, but it doesn't necessarily mean that Calvin Johnson is back. Hopefully we'll see that's the case, so everybody feels a lot better about playing him as a top 15 to 20 option, or even a little bit better than that. But take these pregame warm-up issues for what they are. This is not the heat of the moment. This is not stressing your ankle in a live situation against live defensive backs that are trying to maul you. Hopefully he's able to run routes a little bit better, but don't get overly excited about what we're seeing in warm-ups just yet.
And like you said, Gene, these beat writers probably have some information, or at least a general feel that we don't have, and just their tone can tell us a little bit.
That they'll tell us things without being able to tell us things. I mean, they know what's going on, and Cecil will tell you this too. There's things that go on that he's seeing that he knows that he's not supposed to talk about because teams, there's a reason that there's media portion of practice and non-media portion of practice, and you can get a sense of what's going on in the locker room, but beat writers don't necessarily reveal everything in the same way. And you have to kind of, the more we get to know about these people, we know Dave Burkett's been doing this a long time. Tim Twentyman's been doing this a long time, so you can kind of trust the tone of what they're saying. In the same way that you were talking about Ian Rappaport when we first opened the show today, about him not being so sure, will he be the same? That's his way of telling you that there's the tea leaves are that Calvin Johnson is better this week, but not all the way better. And we're going to get a sense of that from Burkett and Twentyman here pretty soon, I think, too.
And Rappaport is a fantasy football player, and he knows, and all these beat writers know, that we are greedily, anxiously awaiting any little droplet of information they can get us. So they know that we're parsing this stuff, and we're interpreting the stuff, and they're serving it up with that idea, knowing that we're going to run with anything. We must be a real pain in the ass for all the beat writers. I mean, just because little things they say on Twitter, especially, can become wildfires immediately. They're like, whoa, 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 whoa! Like I remember one morning in this year, there was a morning that Mary Kay Cabot said, Johnny Manziel taking first team snaps, and then like 2 minutes later, like, oh, I'm sorry, second team snaps. And by then we had all had like a Saturday morning freak out.
Well, these guys know who their audience is, right? I mean, especially the national media members. They're talking to everybody, and living in Central Ohio, I don't really care about what's going on with the Cardinals on a day-to-day basis unless we're specifically doing this, or you're following a player from a local college that went on to play in Arizona. So, for the most part, the bulk of what these guys' audience is right now are football fans, and most football fans that are looking for information this time of morning on a Sunday are doing so because they care about their fantasy football teams. So they know who their audience is. The reason why we've got so much better injury information and information overall about depth charts and whatever else is because people are asking for that stuff specifically for, fans want to know too. The Manziel stuff is going to be just as big a deal, if not more so, for Cleveland fans than it is everybody in the fantasy world. But that's why Twitter is what it is because people are looking for information now, and it's not because they care about who's going to be the second string running chart in the game today. It's because they want to know what's going on from a target touch usage standpoint.
Really quick while we're on the subject, Gene, and I'm not saying it never happens, but when we hear any sort of news about a player in warm-ups or in some public way seeming to nurse or favor their injury, I'm not saying it never happens, but should we feel comfortable rejecting the idea that it's done on purpose?
That's going to be team dependent. And the reason I'm hedging there is because this happens at every level of football where you're looking for an edge. And, Friday night I had a player in a critical situation when our team had to punt get rolled up into a little bit. And for the next 10 to 15 seconds, he was selling a personal foul running into the kicker penalty rather than something else. So does it happen? Yeah. It's just part of the gamesmanship of things, and the coaches will tell you they are watching how teams are lining up in pregame warmups, how people are moving, which players are taking the bulk of the reps and when. And yeah, there's some gamesmanship going on, but those guys are warming up to get ready to play in 90 minutes. So what you're seeing around the time of warmups is what's likely going to happen. Now, are some players savvy enough to try to mislead at certain points? I think that's probably the case. Yes. And I wouldn't necessarily put too much stock into what you're seeing on Sunday morning because we've had 4 or 5 days from Sunday, watching injuries on Sunday, watching how a player played on Sunday, press conferences on Monday or Wednesday, practice Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, knowing what goes on with the preparation for roster, who gets called up from the practice squad. We've got 6 to 7 days worth of information that lead up to those 90 minutes before game time. So it goes both ways. Don't put too much stock into Calvin Johnson looking good in ladder drills. Don't put too much stock into a player that may be being used a little bit different in pregame warmups. It's just another piece of information we have. If it's the only piece of information that we have because everybody's been quiet about something leading up to that point, then yes, you've got to put a little bit more stock into it just based on percentage of information you have. But that's a long-winded way of saying sometimes it's important, sometimes it's not. And the way you decide how important it is the tone of what you're hearing from the people that are reporting it and how much information, how it jives with the information that you've been given through the rest of the week already.
So Matt, you are still with us from the Abyss?
Yes, this is the
I see. Oh no, I thought that was a still, and that's just because Zook is so peaceful and
No,
serene.
this is the football guy's version of Puxatawny, Pennsylvania on the Calvin Johnson bad play watch right here. He's on the stage, but we don't know if he's going to make his way across the camera. This is the version of the green room right here.
All right, we got a few minutes. I will go a little bit past 11 Eastern just to talk some quick Week 5 preview stuff. And again, Gene's going to be on Twitter and updating his document for subscribers, the article, the Sunday morning injury updates. So we're going to have you covered right up until game time, of course. And I have a thread up in the Shark Pool answering as many questions as I can before the game, not on Twitter. Folks, remember that. Let's talk a little bit about some of these games. I guess we have discussed a bit the Dallas and Houston game. We talked about this a little bit, Matt, but I want to know. You mentioned it and you alluded to it, but you seemed kind of lukewarm, but not emphatically negative about New Orleans' offense to date. What we've seen is kind of what I've described with Tom Brady, not nearly to the extent that just Drew Brees doesn't inspire the same anxiety when he's just sitting in the pocket as he did in the past. This offense isn't as amazing as it has been in the past. Now, we saw for the first few weeks Aaron Rodgers didn't look quite the same, and then last week and now this week he's just fine. Do you expect we're going to get to that moment with Drew Brees this year where we say, what were we worried about? Or is this a transition?
No, I think this is kind of basically what the New Orleans offense has been doing for the past couple of weeks. They're just kind of warming up. I think with Kenny Stills kind of, being hurt, that put a damper on some things because, again, we talk about Brandon Cooks and how well he's played, and he has been fairly dynamic in a certain extent, but that's basically his game is fairly dynamic. Right now, he's not the guy that's going to make the really tough contested plays in tight coverage downfield. Kenny Stills is more their downfield threat, and I think teams knew this with Stills being out, and they were going to say, well, prove it to us, Brandon Cooks, that you're going to make those Steve Smith-esque plays that some draft analysts compared him to, when in fact he's more of a comp to a little bit more dynamic Tavon Austin, what Tavon Austin should have been in a good offense if he was drafted into a good offense. And so you're looking at more screen plays for Cooks and some downfield zone plays where maybe he has to make a nice adjustment and take a hit, but again, he's not having to play the man tight and win the ball. And the guy that's going to do that is either going to be Colston, who's not a downfield guy, or Stills, and they don't have someone who's kind of versatile in both like Lance Moore anymore. So as a result of that, this team really hasn't been able to stretch the field to the level that it should have. And they were close, but no cigar against Dallas in the second half. Colston dropped some passes you don't normally see him drop. And teams could focus a little bit more on Jimmy Graham. And that, when you don't have that bind there that the way they should. And I think Stills is still rounding into form. So the way that I look at this team is going to get better. But I also think that there's a little bit of an identity crisis going on with, how much do we run, how much do we pass, because we started off running pretty well, but, and Robinson has looked pretty good, but how much opportunities do we give him? And I think that this team's a little bit contemplated being a little bit of transition because they were running the ball late last season, and when Ingram was healthy, it looked like they were trying to figure out a way to be able to integrate what they saw into their 2014 game plan, and then Ingram got hurt, and it's kind of thrown this team a little bit for a loop. And so I think that they're going to get their sea legs, and you're going to see a little bit more production out of them as the season progresses.
Okay, we've got just a few minutes. I want to take just a few minutes. It is a pregame show. It is a Sunday morning pregame show. So I'm going to create some false dichotomies and some choices where there's clearly more than just two choices, but just throw both choices at the two of you two, Gene, just for some hot takes. And otherwise, just touching on some things, because I feel like I want to do a better job of this before we sign off, of just getting people excited and thinking about some of the larger storylines and some of the things that are going on in Week 5, not necessarily to do with injuries or fantasy leagues and things like that, but just football. And we can do picks here. Gene, first you. Matt already said he expects Dallas to win in the Battle of Texas. Who are you picking in that one?
I think it's Dallas. If here's something. Going back to the New Orleans situation, they're going into a bye. You've seen Sean Payton and Rob Ryan at each other's throats a little bit. The offense can't get untracked well. We've seen, between the drops in the pass protection, Drew Brees I don't think is moving quite as well in the pocket. His passes haven't been as accurate. This is a game they need to win in the division against Tampa Bay today in a situation where they have not been playing all that well. And with all that's going on, them going into a bye week with a loss or a very close win today is probably not going to be a good situation. So I think that's going to be a very interesting game to watch. I'm hopeful that they're home, the offense blows up, they put 4 touchdowns or more on the board, and everything looks great. But you started to see some kinks in what's going on out there in New Orleans. And as Matt says, I think there's good reason to believe that that's going to turn around. But if it doesn't, it could get a whole lot uglier before it gets better.
Matt, after we watch Kyle Orton today, are we going to say, hey, maybe Buffalo can win the division?
Yes, but I only say that because the other teams really haven't shown enough for me to say that I'm confident about any of them. I mean, the AFC East is the AFC least right now, and Orton is a capable backup who can give you stretches of reasonable starter production and efficiency, and I think that the young players at wide receiver should respond well, and you're going to see him operate this offense at a level that E.J. Manuel has not done. E.J. Manuel has not been sharp this year. He does not look like the guy that he flashed the opportunity to look like when he was at Buffalo as a rookie. I thought he played better as a rookie than he's played right now.
Gene, after beating up on Tennessee Community College and Jacksonville High School, Indy has a bit of a tougher matchup against Baltimore today at home. Andrew Luck is the number 1 fantasy quarterback. This is looking like this is the year. Are we still saying that after this week, or does Baltimore bring him back down to earth a bit?
He may come back down to earth a little bit. I think a lot of that depends on whether or not Lardarius Webb is able to come back from the back struggles that he's been listed probable and practicing with and then been made inactive. I think if he's back, it's going to be a little bit tougher sledding for Andrew Luck. What I'm most interested in seeing here is whether or not Steve Smith can keep up the high number of targets he's getting, whether or not defenses start to pay a lot more attention to him, whether we see Torrey Smith get a few more targets, what they're going to be doing with the running game in Baltimore. I think the story here is going to be how the offense how the Baltimore offense, not Buffalo, how the Baltimore offense responds to what teams have been presenting them with over the past couple of weeks.
Matt, is Bishop Sankey going to be a hot waiver wire pickup this week?
Yeah, he will be. If he's going to get the opportunities, he will. Though I will comment that again, it's going to come down to what he does in the offense. I saw some analysis on our message boards recently about showing some GIFs and saying what he looked like, and I would love to go into detail about that because I think that, but we won't for right now. But I will say that the analysis I will say is that the holes in those GIFs are very wide. Those are runs that every back should be able to make in the NFL and get at least the amount of yardage that Sankey did. They did not show a special back, and I think that there are folks who really love Sankey and are looking for reasons to make him a really good player, and any glimmer of hope they are trying to jump on. And I understand that excitement, but again, it's a matter of him being able to make the difficult runs, and the runs right now that he's had are not difficult. So more opportunities, the better for him, but it's a lot like Alfred Blue with a little bit more athleticism.
Gene, Carolina's defense going to stop the bleeding today?
No, probably not. I think they've got issues. It's nice that they've got Thomas Davis back, but the pass rush, Charles Johnson is a shell of what he used to be. Mario Addison and the guys that they have filling in for Greg Hardy have not been consistent at all. Star Latulele is a nice player, but he's really not ramped up his pass rush production much. The corners, the secondary in general, have been struggling. It's not a great matchup for them today. Unfortunately, with Chicago, especially with that passing offense, they may be able to hold Martellus Bennett down a little bit, but Alshon Jeffrey is healthy. Brandon Marshall fully practiced all week. I think that's going to be a hard game for them to win, even at home.
Matt, there's a matchup that we haven't hyped that much, but this one's really fascinating. We've got on one side of the ball Denver, And we know all this. We don't have to rehash all the Denver storylines. But on the other side of the ball today is Arizona, 3-0 with Drew Stanton starting. Again, we didn't even bring up Carson Palmer because Gene's been keeping us about 3 steps ahead of the national media on that one. But Drew Stanton. So here's my false dichotomy here. On one hand, it's Drew Stanton, and Denver coasts and Denver shows that, yeah, they're still one of the major Super Bowl favorites. On the other hand, you have Arizona, who just, no matter what personnel losses they have, this team is scrappy. This team finds a way to get you on special teams or on defense, or now you have some guys like John Brown that can make plays on offense, Andre Ellington. Do you think we're coming out of this game saying, yeah, hey, if Denver's a Super Bowl contender, then what does that say about Arizona? Or do we come out of this game saying, yeah, there's Denver holding serve, and Arizona is still a second-tier team at best?
I think no matter what happens, even if Arizona puts the beat down on Denver, I think that we're still going to end up having the perception that Arizona is a second-tier team moving its way up, and Denver had a bad week. And that's really all that it's gonna do in terms of the conversation 2 to 3 weeks from now. But I do think that we should have a competitive first half. The defense is certainly a physical defense in Arizona. The weapons are there that if Arizona can catch Denver napping a little bit on defense, which tends to happen, that you can get some big plays from that trio of wide receivers and Andre Ellington. So the capability of this game being close is there. But I do think that Arizona is still not quite ready for prime time. I like the team. I'm kind of rooting for this team. I'd like to see this team beat Denver. But I don't think that they have it just yet to put 4 quarters together at a level where against the likes of a player like Peyton Manning. They're close, though, because they certainly look good against San Diego, who has played fairly well this year, and that's and that made all the difference. So they're capable of doing it, but I wouldn't expect anybody to say at the end of this, even if they jump up 28-0 and just make Peyton Manning look horrible, people are going to wrap it up to a bye-week letdown.
Well, and just that Arizona is a really competitive team. They don't back down.
No
matter how outgunned they are. Speaking of being outgunned, Gene, did Kansas City just catch the right team at the right time? The city's hyped up. How about those Royals, Gene? Or can Kansas City go into San Francisco and compete today, or are we going to show that was kind of an outlier outcome? Mute.
So professional. I think Kansas City can compete anywhere. They've got a pass rush that can keep them in games. They've got a secondary that's okay, even though it's dinged up a little bit. They've been playing well enough. And they've got Jamal Charles in a running game that can be successful. Alex Smith is able to move the ball. They can, they've got an offense that can sustain itself. And that pass rush will keep them in games. So it's going to be a tough game in San Francisco today. But I think Kansas City's not a fluke.
And they have Travis Kelce. Come on, Gene. Know your audience, man.
I was on mute. I was talking about Travis Kelce all those times.
Of course. That's a good one. That's one that we could use, for our wives. You had me on mute. I was talking about that. I was on mute. I heard you. Last one before we head off into the sunset and enjoy this great Sunday of football. Matt, on the other side of that, New England, how does this team, do they punch themselves out of the corner? Do we come out of tomorrow night saying, well, we were all a little early to sprinkle some dirt on the grave of Brady and Belichick? Or does Cincinnati see that staggered bully that had beat them up and beat up so many other AFC teams and take that shot and say, I've got you now, and we see yet another, it's like a long death scene, Is that what happens tomorrow night?
I think tomorrow night what you're going to see is somewhat the opposite, similar but opposite scenario of Dallas, where last year, if you asked me this, I'd say, yeah, Dallas, whatever. They're the same they ever were, which is they look great one week and Jerry Jones is slapping backs and acting, how about them Cowboys, and the next time he's crying in his soup. So I think when you look at the Patriots, though, this team I think has become a little bit too, I don't know how else to put it, but inbred, I think, a little bit with their coaching staff. When you rehire Josh McDaniels like this, it's kind of gotten to a retread point. And you can see what's going on with their wide receiver situation. They basically took arguably their best receiver in camp this year, and they've barely played him. And then they cut him this week. And what they've gone with is basically a retread from Carolina, who really isn't as good. And I know they'll say, well, how do you know? I mean, these are professional scouts who coaches who understand what they have and this, that, and the other. Well, look at the Patriots' track record with receivers over the past 5 to 6 years since they let go of Randy Moss, and who they've brought in to try and replace him. And basically, they either can't stay healthy, they can't catch the ball, can't understand the offense, and then they basically admitted that they don't know how to draft wide receivers, so they've casted a wide net. Their best receiver wasn't the guy they drafted, and then they just cut him. So I look at this team, the lack of the offensive line, how poorly it's playing, and I don't think they're going to come out. They're going to come out punching, but they're going to throw a wild hook. They're going to end up, basically tearing a labrum while they're doing it, and then they're going to have to sit there into the cover like this and just take a beating, because that's what's going to happen to this team.
Yeah, or they throw that hook and step into that straight left. Boom.
Yes.
Action. Yeah, that's right. Boxing. Got it. That's another one. 178. The boxing podcast. We just sit around and are nostalgic about 1980s boxing. Last note before we. I'm definitely there. Oh man, the welterweight division. Calvin Johnson from Dave Burkett. Before we sign off, Calvin Johnson first up in our pre-game receiver drills, doing more in early drills than last week. If you're waiting fantasy word, I love it that they cater straight to us. Looks like he'll play not 100%, but better than last week. And again, you're not seeing Dave Burkett saying, "Hey, if you're waiting for fantasy, all systems go for it." Yeah, he's saying he's gonna play.
Nuance.
Yeah,
nuance. 10 years ago, we're getting fantasy football.
Yeah.
Just 10 years ago.
Read parse that when he says not 100% but better than last week. It's non-committal, and that's kind of how you should be about him in your lineup. But we're always committed, should be committed, and all those other things. Just like you out there, everybody. This is really fun to get to hang out with you guys on Sunday mornings. Get to hang out with these guys on Sunday mornings, and we will get to it. We'll be back as always here on the Audible, footballguys.com. We never let you go. So always enjoy the games. Stay classy.